Good evening, everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Kara Circle. Kara Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're joined tonight in an event co-sponsored by Agnes Scott College to welcome Professor Sophie Wu in conversation with Dr. Jan Willis and Alan Pope for a discussion of Awakening Dignity, a guide to living a life of deep fulfillment, the Buddhist master's guide to cultivating dignity through meditation to live a meaningful and fulfilling life. This event is co-sponsored by the Agnes Scott College History Department, Asian Studies Department, and Department of Religious Studies. We are delighted to be here with all of you tonight, both physically in this room. We have a packed house for folks watching virtually at home. You don't know that, but we do. And for all of you watching with us worldwide. So we're going to invite you to ask questions, both virtually and here in the room. For accessibility reasons, and also because we are recording, I'll be bringing around a microphone to all of our friends in the room. And for folks who are virtual, if you ask a question, we'll vocalize it for you. So be sure to put it in the chat, and we'll make sure it gets asked. So at this moment, I am going to pass it over to Jan Willis and say thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here to help celebrate the publication of this wonderful book by Sophie. So glad to see it. I remember fondly, but often, well, not too often. We met over at Evans, Suchin and I, when this book was happening. And so I know firsthand some of the work, a tremendous amount of work went into making this book a reality. So I'm really thrilled that it's out and that we all have copies of it in our hands. And if we don't get, we'll have them after this. So I'm to ask some questions so that Suchin is able to tell you more about the book. So, Suchin, thank you for the book. Thank you for all that hard work that I know you put into this over the last 5 years. You teach history and Asian studies here at Agnes Scott. So maybe you could tell us all how it is that you come to collaborate on a book on Tibetan Buddhist practice and theory.
Well, many things had to come together for the collaboration to happen. First, Phakchok Rinpoche and I had to meet. And it's remarkable that we are at Karis Bookstore today because Karis Bookstore is partnered with Agnes Scott College, and Agnes Scott College is where Phakchok Rinpoche and I met. And Rinpoche has visited Agnes Scott several times. During his first visit, I was introduced by my good friend and colleague Abraham here to Rinpoche, and also to have the opportunity to have lunch with him. And I started to attend his talks. I actually attended every talk he gave in Atlanta and later in Carrollton at the University of West Georgia. In one of those talks, he mentioned dignity. And I was very impressed by that because I had never heard anybody speaking about dignity in such a fresh way. I was very struck by his teaching. And after that, I attended many of his retreats. Among his many teachings, the theme of dignity kept coming up again and again. So in 2016, I was having breakfast in Kathmandu, Nepal, with a group of friends. And at one point, the topic of dignity came up. And I realized I was not the only one who was impacted by his teachings on dignity. So I proposed to write a book. I was thinking very small. I was thinking this will be a quick book, just a few talks that I will put together. I will edit them and will publish it. But then very soon it became a much larger project. But I proposed the idea to Rinpoche, and Rinpoche really liked it, so I began to work. That's how I started to collaborate with Rinpoche.
Okay. Could you say a few more words about who he is? Phakchok Rinpoche comes from a really illustrious family of Tibetan Buddhist teachers and masters.
Yes, that's a very good question, Jen, because when I met him in 2009 at Agnes Start, I didn't know who he was. When I had lunch with him, I didn't know who he was or how important he was in the Tibetan Buddhist lineage. And later I learned that he came from an illustrious family. His grandfather, Tuku Ojin Rinpoche, is one of the greatest meditation master or Dzogchen masters in the 20th century. And his uncles, some of you may know, the Mingyu Rinpoche, Sonin Rinpoche, they are important Tibetan Buddhist masters. So he grew up in such an environment. And when I started to study with him, I feel I really benefited from not only this tradition, but the lineage in which he came from.
Yes, it certainly comes through in this. I wonder now if you could say something about, I have a short side story. His grandfather, Phakchok Rinpoche's grandfather, stayed, and you talk about this a little in the book, and how he's such an example for Phakchok Rinpoche. But his grandfather, Adnadi Gompa, oversaw more than 300 nuns who are the most practiced nuns you'll ever see. That is, practice in terms of having done 3-year, 3-month, 3-day retreats. I visited this place once and met some of these nuns, remarkable, modest women who had all done at least 1 or 2 3-year retreats under his grandfather. Marvelous. Okay. I wonder if Tibetan Buddhists talk about dignity, especially Tibetans in the Nyingma tradition. And they define it as basic, stable goodness, something akin to Tathagata, our basic goodness. We might not recognize that. But is this what Phakchok Rinpoche means when he says dignity? Or in another way of putting it, could you comment on what he means by the term translated here as dignity?
Sure. I think what you have in mind, one example is Sonin Rinpoche's Pure Free Dignity. There's a wonderful book, right? And in that book, for example, Sonin Rinpoche is talking about an advanced meditation practice called Dzogchen. And so the book is a compilation of Dharma talks. And he never really tried to define what he means by dignity. But of course, the meaning of dignity is throughout the book. And this book try to define dignity in a thematic and systematic way, because there are so many terms in Tibetan they can be translated as dignity. And actually, in one of the meetings I had with Rinpoche went through several Tibetan terms that express 1 or 2 or some aspects of what we mean by dignity in English. in a Western vocabulary, and that's very interesting. So here in this book, what he means by dignity is something called Vajra pride. And Vajra pride is the opposite of pride, interestingly, right? Vajra pride is like what Jen just mentioned, is recognize our fundamental purity, our fundamental good and pure heart, and with that recognition, we gain certainty and trust. So, what dignity means in this book is the recognition of the basic goodness, is the quality that arises from their recognition. And we all have that, but sometimes we lose touch with that. And perhaps I can read a couple passages that define dignity in the book. If you have the book, you can turn to page 16 on the third paragraph. When I speak of dignity in this book, I refer to the power that comes from knowing decisively that our heart is noble. Our nature is inherently pure. We are whole and complete. It is the opposite of feeling that we are not enough. Dignity is not a passing state. It is an unwavering trust. This unwavering trust in ourselves acts as our protection against life's ups and downs. It enables us to see situations clearly and respond appropriately. In dignity, we are not riddled with uncertainty and self-doubt. Rather, we can notice our own mistakes and correct them. It is a way of seeing, and it is a way of being. And also, on page 222, is the last chapter. So at the end, Rinpoche tried to remind readers again what he means by dignity. He says, quote, "In a nutshell, dignity is certainty in who you really are. The Buddhist teachings on dignity show us how to shift our sense of fundamental identity from the narrow confines of a constricted ego self to the wide open expanses of unshackled Buddha nature. In other words, now we fully embrace and identify with the perfect and complete essence at the core of every sentient existence. This includes you, me, and everyone else. Therefore, even though you train to see yourself and not someone or something else, once you see yourself, you also understand the world around you. Dignity is the sense of certainty and trust that arises when we recognize the fundamental purity of our nature beyond any sense of personal identity." So, so basically, dignity in this book is when we shift our identity from an ego form through social interaction to our genuine noble nature.
Too bad it's easier said than done. But it does give us confidence.
That's right, exactly.
We are basically good.
Yes.
One of the tropes, one of the themes here in some of Rinpoche's talks are the ideas of medicine, that we suffer because, that is, we have an illness, because we thrash around inside our emotions, thinking they're real, and they cause us to suffer, whereas we don't see the clear sky of our basic goodness. The clouds, the emotions are adventitious. They're not permanent. Sorry. They're not permanent. So medicine is used throughout here,
Right.
throughout this text also. And some people, one of the things I said was, this is medicine for what ails us. And Rinpoche seems to note that as he's talking to Western students, he gives a lot of examples in this book of conversations he's had. Oh, very good. Vajrapāt Pride. Thank you so much. Now, on the nitty gritty, sort of over the years, you didn't just have the talks that he gave to you personally, but when you, as you say, when you started doing this, you found there are a whole lot of, like 15 years of talks. This book is so well structured, I find. It's so well put together. Could you say something about the process? That is, how did you take all those talks and all those lectures and organize them as well as you did? I mean, congratulations on doing it, but it's quite a job you did. Could you tell us more about it?
Sure. So I mentioned that in 2016, I proposed to write a quick book. It may take a few months, I thought, but it turned out to be a very big project. And the reason is because there are two things that happened soon after I proposed the book idea to Rinpoche. One is I realized his teachings on dignity are not confined to a few talks. It actually spreads throughout a lot of his teachings here and there. So I started to study, collect, study, and try to understand the materials extending over 15 years. So that's one. Second, Rinpoche and I both feel we are using basically a Western term. We need to do justice to the Western term because it's a very important word that we use actually quite frequently. And so we need to understand the term in the Western tradition. So for that reason, I spent for about a year researching almost everything I could find on dignity, written by philosophers, written by lawyers, written by social justice activists, written by Confucian scholars in China. So I spent a year doing that, and then I presented my findings with Rinpoche. I actually went through some of those with Rinpoche. And then with that, I had Rinpoche's permission, I started to write. And Jen is so right to mention that dealing with such vast materials was challenging, especially at the beginning. So I struggled a bit, and I think I told Jen a bit over lunch at Evans. I drafted about 3 chapters, and then something happened. I read one teaching that Rinpoche gave. In that teaching, he explains the 3 steps that we need to do. One is we need to know our nature is pure. Yes, it's very hard to do, but first we need to have the awareness about our nature. And with that awareness, then we can change. And after that, if we work with these 2, then slowly and slowly we can gain certainty and trust in our nature. When I saw this teaching, it's as if a light bulb suddenly switched on above my head. This is it. This is the natural progression, the natural order of the book. And from that on, at that time, I started to divide all the materials I have into these 3 parts. So part 1 is called Your Nature is Pure. Part 2, you can change. Part 3, gaining certainty and trust. And this is, I was very happy to find that actually. And this helped me understand this actually is the inner logic of Rinpoche's dignity teachings. And it's so inspiring. And this was such a transformative experience for me as the writer of the book.
That's wonderful. The 3 parts are excellent here. You also add something. At the end of each chapter, you give us what are called dignity trainings, exercises, meditations, and then after the meditations, some words of inspiration. I love the structure of this book. Okay, I love it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Where did those dignity trainings come from?
Because Rinpoche emphasizes time and again, just have the knowledge of dignity is not enough. We need to embody it. And to embody dignity, we need training. And all the trainings in this book are based on Rinpoche's meditation instructions. Yeah, and I just put them into the chapters that make sense. And then I found at the beginning of each chapter, we have a quote. And at the end of each chapter, we also have something called inspirational support. It's to support the meditation practice.
Nice structure. I know that when you're discussing the Western terms for dignity, that you not only quote from the Declaration of Human Rights, everyone is born, every human being is born, free and equal in dignity. And also you quote Martin Luther King.
Yes.
Early on.
Right.
A talk he gave to junior high school students, which said what was the most important thing for them? Belief in their own dignity. That sense of dignity strikes me as being closest to Vajra pride.
Yes.
So thank you for that.
So I just want to point out for people who have the book in hand, what Jen is talking about is on page 12, is when Martin Luther King talked to a group of students in Philadelphia, and this is the quote, I think it's worth reading it. Number 1 in your life's blueprint should be a deep belief in your own dignity. I think it's very beautiful, and it definitely resonates with Rinpoche's teaching of Vajra pride, with this indestructible confidence in our inner quality, in our basicness, in our noble heart.
So following that statement, I wonder if you think that this is a book, perhaps, clearly I think you do, but do you think that this is a book for everyone, not a specialist, not a Buddhist studies specialist?
Yes, it's true. The intention of the book is for everyone, is for general readers. That's why even though there are some Buddhist terms in this book, every term is clearly defined. And we hope that people are able to understand, even if they are not Buddhist, they can understand those terms easily and benefit from it. But Rinpoche also hopes this book will bring fresh insight for people who are advanced practitioners. And I want to take this opportunity to speak a little bit about the specific audience I had in mind when I was writing the book. What I didn't mention before was that so I spent a lot of time researching and reading, and discussing with Rinpoche about the book. The actual writing happened when the pandemic occurred. So when the pandemic hit in 2020, I asked myself, if there is one thing I really would like to do in this life, what would it be? My answer was, write this book. Write this book. So I spent 1.5 years writing the book, and I took a leave of absence from my teaching job at Agnes Scott. And it's interesting that even though I was not in the classroom teaching my students, I held my students very close to my heart when I wrote. So this book was very much written for my students. And I say my students because I knew or know them. But in more general way, I think a lot of students or young people will benefit from the book. And it is because today, our society as a whole, we tend to see ourselves through the lens of the society. We understand or misunderstand who we are from what society thinks what we should or should not do. And this creates a distorted lens of seeing ourselves. And a lot of times, the way we see ourselves in this way is very different from from who we really are. So the book mentioned 2 mirrors. One mirror is we see ourselves through the reflection of other people, the way other people reflect back to us. If somebody tell you you are good, somebody tell you you are bad, this is how you think yourself. This book offers a different mirror. It's called the mirror of the heart. It's the mirror of the heart. It's if we look inward, we see ourselves, we actually will be able to discover we have everything that we need to be good and powerful individuals. So there are 2 kinds of mirror here. And when I was writing, I was thinking about my student struggle. And those struggles actually, I think many of us are familiar with. For example, self-criticism, self-doubt, lack of confidence in what we can do, anxiety, even low self-esteem. I think maybe at one time or another, we feel those emotions, or negative thoughts. So you mentioned earlier, Buddhist teachings can be seen as the medicine. They can help us from our illness. The book on dignity hopes to provide just that. Provide the medicine for our anxiety, for our low self-esteem, for our self-doubt. And it's not to cure those illnesses on the surface. Actually, it's to go deeper into the root, to see the root of those problems. And the way Rinpoche sees it is the root of those problems we encounter today actually can be contributed to the lack of dignity. Meaning, we don't really know ourselves. We don't know we are fundamentally good and pure. We can always go back to our heart, not to Facebook or social media or other social media or to Instagram, or even newspapers to find a solution for our problems. We can go inward to check ourselves and to develop confidence from there.
I am reminded of Shantideva, the 8th century Buddhist poet, who says, 3 times he says in the Bodhicharya Avatar, what invalid was ever cured of his illness by simply reading in the doctor's treatises? You have to take the medicine yourself.
Yes. And the dignity training exercises at the end of the chapters are the medicine Rinpoche provides for us.
I know that you've planned some readings, is that right? You
Yes.
still want to do that. Perhaps before you do that, I want to provide the opportunity for you, Suchen, to say anything else you'd like to, even if it's to tell us about future projects, that's okay.
Okay.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about this before the reading?
Yes. Let me just mention a few points that Rinpoche always emphasized, always reminded us again and again. One is dignity is power, and we are inherently powerful. And if we get in touch with our inner dignity, we naturally are powerful. So I think this is a teaching that affected me very deeply. So dignity is power. And the second is, Rinpoche reminds us the importance of knowing both our nature, not just know our nature, but also our habits, and to know the difference. To know the difference between our fundamental goodness and also our bad habit. And I want to mention that I think, especially on TV drama, we will see a character who say something like, you have to accept the way I am. Right? It's almost like a cliche. But I think the problem is, oftentimes it means we want people to accept our habits. But our habits can be either good or bad. And if who we are is our habits, the ground beneath us is always moving and shaking. So Rinpoche reminds us is who we are is our nature, but we need to know our habits. And number 3, I already mentioned, experience. It's not just to know something, but to experience it. Not just to know dignity, know the theory of dignity, know different philosophers talking about dignity, but to actually experience dignity and embody it. The book is actually the first step of a bigger project. There will be an online course done by Shambhala. And we have finished filming the course. The course may be launched either later this year or early next year. So this one. And currently, there are 2 reading groups. They are reading the book together, not organized by me. And we are hoping that in the near future, we will organize Awakening Dignity Study and Practice Group, because Rinpoche really wants us to practice it, not just talk about it. Not just read the book, but do the exercises, take the medicine, basically, and to improve, to discuss with each other. And then we are also contemplating dignity workshop. Maybe half a day workshop is like a mini retreat, half a day or a weekend workshop designed for specific groups, such as healthcare professionals or educators or students. So we are still thinking about different ways of benefiting people.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah, and by the way, Awakening Dignity has a website. You can go to awakeningdignity.org. There will be more information there. And Rinpoche did a radio interview, and it's on the website. It's posted on the website. And Rinpoche also did a book launch talk. It's also on the website. So you can find some information there, some audio, video on the website. And in the future, we will update the information when we have more activities.
Thank you. Lots more to come. Awakening dignity.
Good to see everyone here, and thank you for coming online as well. So I'm going to read just the first little bit of chapter 5 in the book. It's the first chapter in part 2, You Can Change. And it's called Making Friends with Sticky Mind. This is a chapter that quite a number of people have commented on. And Rinpoche himself has alluded to it in talks that he's given discussing the book. So I think you will enjoy this. It begins with a quote from Chogyam Trungpa. Becoming, quote, awake involves seeing our confusion more clearly. So this is the beginning of Making Friends with Sticky Mind. I have always enjoyed visiting Jackson Hole in Wyoming, a place of beautiful natural scenery. This is where I gave my first teaching after completing my formal studies in India. I have made many good friends in Jackson Hole over the years, and I try to stop there whenever I can. On my last visit, I had a nice lunch with friends at a restaurant in the picturesque town square. Afterward, I saw a beautiful dog outside the restaurant. It looked like a Siberian husky. Being fond of dogs, I wanted to find out if it really was a Siberian husky. So I asked the dog owner, "What is that?" "It is a dog," the owner replied, rolling her eyes. Realizing my question was not clear, I rephrased it. "What kind of dog is it?" The owner shrugged and mumbled something I couldn't comprehend. Sensing that she was irritated and didn't care to have a conversation, I said, "Okay," and walked away. When others don't respond positively to our friendly attempts at engaging them, we might simply notice this in a matter-of-fact way, thinking, "I was just trying to have a conversation, but she didn't want to." Or we might feel concerned about the other person, thinking, "Poor thing, she must be having a bad day." Perhaps most common is that the experience ignites an emotional response in us. "She is so rude." This last example would indicate that we are taking things personally and jumping to conclusions. This is very tempting for us to do, but the reality is often different from what we assume. What appears before our eyes rarely gives us the whole picture. Do we know why the dog owner was grumpy that day? Not at all, right? We must take her situation into account and recognize that we don't have all the information. In other words, we must try to look beneath the surface and not take things at face value. But how many of us, when encountering a situation like this, have the time, mental space, and composure to mindfully respond in a deliberate and skillful way? Instead of a calm, open response, such situations often elicit an automatic and compulsive reaction. When our mind is calm and stable, we are happy and respond to situations calmly. When our mind is irritated and unstable, our feelings swing quickly, changing from happiness to sadness in an instant. Then we react in ways that we might later regret. The next day, I was giving a teaching during a meditation retreat in the majestic Rocky Mountains. I told the retreat participants the story of my encounter with a dog owner. The moment I started talking, I knew I was not 100% free of the incident. In all honesty, the incident did not bother me or affect my mood. I went on with my day as if nothing had happened. But the fact that I had remembered it and then told the story unveiled a very subtle form of clinging, barely detectable, yet lurking beneath my consciousness. I call this type of clinging sticky mind. Often sticky mind is not so subtle. Rather than simply recalling an incident, as I did in this case, we might ruminate and obsess over it. We might harshly judge another person and do or say things in a reactive and hurtful way. We might be plagued with self-doubt and find ourselves overtaken by a mood that is difficult to shake. It feels like something sticky has infected us. But that's not quite it. It is our mind that is sticky. In a nutshell, sticky mind is emotion stuck in concept. Fixed ideas and negative emotions mutually support each other. Our feelings and emotions are constantly changing, but because of the sticky quality of our mind, we perceive them as permanent. Therefore, we tend to attach to things we like and avoid things we don't. These tendencies develop into habits, resulting in patterns or grooves in which our mind moves. We develop a narrow and constricted view of who we are and how the world is, and we interpret events in a way that fits this view. It feels as if the ideas, feelings, and perceptions associated with this way of seeing latch onto us and won't let go. In actuality, it is our mind that holds them close. It is our mind that is sticky. It is our mind that makes a dynamic reality static and fixed. Viewing ourselves as static and fixed prevents us from knowing our genuine nature. It limits us and makes us inflexible. When our mind is sticky, we often act in ways that contradict our fundamental goodness or best intentions. Sticky mind prevents us from being fundamentally open, free, kind, and loving to ourselves and to others. It prevents us from knowing and embracing our inherent dignity. What is the solution to sticky mind? How do we deal with emotions stuck in concept? Whether sticky mind is as subtle as remembering an unusual incident that recently happened, or as coarse as obsessive rumination, I have found that simply being aware of my sticky mind gives me the power to change. The moment we glimpse our disturbing emotions and the concepts that support them, they begin to weaken. They cannot grow in the light of awareness. On the other hand, lack of awareness is fertile ground for afflictive emotions. When the right supporting conditions come together, negative emotions can erupt without warning, causing harm to others and to ourselves. Therefore, it is imperative that we come to know these negative emotions and see them whenever they arise. In time, the patterns that maintain them will weaken and our minds won't be so adhesive. So that's the first part of this chapter. For the sake of brevity, I won't read more, but I will just sort of summarize that at this point, Rinpoche goes on to discuss the 5 categories of negative emotions, which are anger, jealousy, pride, attachment, and ignorance. And then Rinpoche discusses each one and explains how seeing these emotions and becoming familiar with them and even making friends with them is the way that we are able to transform them from being sources of confusion into sources of wisdom. And through this process, we're able to unveil our inherent good nature, good heart, or the Tathagata Buddha nature that Jan referred to, and gain confidence in it, which is another way of saying it's how we can awaken dignity. So I hope you enjoyed the reading.
So now we want to invite folks to ask questions. And we would love for folks in this room to ask questions, but first we have a virtual question to kick us off while y'all who are here do some thinking. This question is from Yael Maines. Yael asks or says, many congratulations, Shu Chen. I'm so excited and happy the book is here. My question is, why was the concept of dignity specifically important to you, either as a woman, an educator, scholar, or a person living in the US of our time?
Thank you, Yael. I will answer Yael's question with a story. When Rinpoche came to Agnes God, one time I invited him to give a talk to my class. And I was very prepared because this the way I am, over-prepared. I prepare a pretty polished introduction on Rinpoche. I printed it, I was going to read it. When Rinpoche arrived at my classroom, he looked at my notes. He said, "You know me very well. You don't need your notes." He asked me to put down my notes, which I did. So I patched things up and said something about Rinpoche. Honestly, I do not remember anything that I said. It was such an embarrassing moment, and I was thinking, oh my God, in front of my students. You can imagine that in that incident, and probably not just that particular incident, but similar incidents in our lives, when we have such doubts about ourselves, about I'm not good enough, I can never prepare well enough, something is going to go wrong. And that was a very good teaching for me on dignity. And of course, coincidentally, he talked about dignity in his teachings in Atlanta, which I attended. So I really put this together. I use his teachings to reflect on my inner turmoil. And this is just that one incident, but I have many, many of similar incidents in my life. And I didn't like it. I didn't like how I felt. I didn't like how I reacted to it. I didn't like how I responded to it. It was those kind of feelings were suffering. And I really didn't want to do it that way. So that's why I started to be very interested in dignity. But honestly, my interest in the topic of dignity has a lot to do with Phakchok Rinpoche. And in chapter 2, we mentioned his grandfather as his role model for dignity. For me, Phakchok Rinpoche is the role model for dignity because he taught me everything I know about dignity and how to live a dignified life.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from folks who are physically here with us tonight? Not yet. All right. I'm going to ask our question from our friend and fellow professor at Agnes Scott College, Dr. Robin Morris. Robin asks or says, "It is so wonderful to hear this powerful talk. How does this research show up in your daily life? have any of your behaviors or attitudes changed as a result of this research? And finally, what are some of the life hacks we might incorporate into daily life to honor our dignity and that of others? So really 3 questions in one.
Thank you, Robin. Those are very big questions, so I will do my best to answer. Because I spent so many years immersing myself in the research and the study and the reading and the writing. What benefited me, what changed me the most is now when I have such discomfort that I mentioned, such discomfort, restless, self-doubt, when I have those moments, I actually refer to Rinpoche's teachings in the book. And I also try to do the exercises. And one of the exercises in the book is very simple and very useful. It's very useful. And Rinpoche still talk about it a lot. It's a very simple exercise. You do not need to be a Buddhist or sit in meditation for hours and hours and hours in order to do it. So basically, you just follow your breath. When you have anxiety or self-doubt, you just follow your breath and you take a deep breath and breathe all the way out. And then you pause. And then you breathe in again, but not take a full breath. So it affects me on my daily life. When I have difficulties, this is what I do. When I have, when things happen, they are unexpected, then suddenly I feel like I have some negative thoughts or emotions that come up without being invited. This is what I do. I go back to the exercises, breathing, or loving kindness meditation. I use those meditation to help me to change my perspective, and I use those exercises to transform my emotions. So this is the way I do it. Can you remind me 2 other questions that Robin mentioned?
Yes, so you kind of answered so she said, how has the research shown up in your daily life? How have any of your behaviors or attitudes changed as a result of this research? And then finally, what are some of the life hacks we can incorporate? So certainly breathing is a good life hack.
Yeah.
We can incorporate into our daily life to honor our dignity and that of others.
Okay. Those are really, really good questions. And it may take more reflection on this to answer. Let me say a few words about the research. Because I spent about a year reading a lot of different things. And I learned a lot. And I really like that. I really like research too. What I found was that there's this intellectual understanding of dignity. Academians, we like that, right? There are a lot of intellectual study, analysis, logic, that's on the one hand. But there's another kind of dignity study and practice is what this book is about. So these are 2 different kind of dignity, 2 different kind of knowledges and practices about dignity. So for me personally, I find that even though the intellectual analysis of dignity is fascinating. It's fascinating. And, but I find it probably doesn't affect our daily life as much as this other kind of understanding of dignity. So for me personally, after my research, especially after extensive research on this topic, I find myself much in favor of experiencing what dignity is. And I think that's aligned with what Martin Luther King said. This is our lives. This is number one in our lives blueprint. See, I don't think he meant it's important to just have the knowledge, just to know that, I think he very much imply this is how we should live it. So this is my answer to Robin's second question.
Thank you so much, and I think you know where Robin is, so you can think on it more and return to her. But also, I think it's a useful question for all of us to think about. How do we show up and honor the dignity of others? That's something that I think it's a good thing to leave here with, to keep meditating on and thinking about, because we'll each do that in our own way. So thank you both so much for being present with us tonight. Thank you everyone here physically with us in the house. I want to encourage our folks who are watching virtually at home to click this teal button at the bottom of your screen to buy Awakening Dignity, a guide to living a life of deep fulfillment from Charis. It really does help us when you buy your event books directly from us. You can also make a donation to Charis Circle, our nonprofit programming arm. Any amount really does help us, so thank you for considering doing that. And we're going to say goodnight to y'all. Thank you so much for being with us.